We have breaking news that just crossed the wires. This is courtesy of ABC News. They are reporting that former Vice President Mike Pence has been subpoenaed. The headline, Pence subpoenaed by special counsel overseeing Trump probes attributed to sources. ABC News reporting this according to multiple sources. I want to be very clear with you on a very interesting headline about what we know and what we don't. Number one, we don't know exactly who all the sources are. Number two, we don't know why exactly he's been subpoenaed, although we do know a bit about the special counsel probe. Number three, NBC News has not matched or broken this reporting. So we are, to be clear, reporting this courtesy of the ABC News scoop. Now, we do know that special counsel Jack Smith has been furiously at work. We know that he's subpoenaed other types of information and many aides and individuals around the Trump-Pence orbit, both the White House and as a campaign. I want to bring in a former federal prosecutor, Renato Mariotti, to give us some insights here. We, as always, are going to be very careful with the information, an ABC News scoop, but a big scoop, Renato. What do you think when you see the news that for some reason this subpoena is reaching Mike Pence himself, according to ABC?
I think what this suggests to me is that Jack Smith is looking at the campaign to pressure Mike Pence to overturn the election in the United States Senate when there was a counting of the electoral votes. So I think, that is the one piece of information that only Mike Pence could talk about. He had phone calls with former President Trump, where he was allegedly pressured to essentially stop the counting of the electoral votes and or send the matter back to the states. And there were repeated conversations with him. And I have to believe that that is why Jack Smith wants to speak with him.
And let's look at it this way. If there were only questions about potentially classified documents, an issue that we know was in Smith's purview and an issue that has touched multiple officials, your view as a prosecutor is at this juncture, it would be unlikely that you would subpoena what we call the principal, in this case, the former vice president, if you were only looking at that. Is that your inference?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't see how, for just the Mar-a-Lago documents case, you would need this witness. And so really, it also suggests to me he's pretty far along. In other words, I suspect that Pence was one of the later witnesses you would call, not one of the first. In other words, you wouldn't want to bring in Mike Pence until you've talked to all the aides who were there for those initial conversations with Eastman, and we're trying to convince him to change his mind, to pull back from the theory he was pushing. So it seems to me like Pence is the last witness, or one of the last witnesses in the lineup that you would call regarding the January 6th matter. So I think very significant, suggests not only that Jack Smith is vigorously pursuing that area of inquiry, but also that he's pretty far along.
Yeah, as you say, far along if that theory of the case holds. Again, for viewers just joining us, this news crossed the wires since we came on air. ABC News reporting a subpoena going to Vice President Mike Pence personally. That is him, not an aide, him, not a tranche of documents. Very significant, we might call it a significant piece of a witness pursuit or possibly subject of interest. We could call it an escalation of sorts, although to be very careful, we don't always know everyone who they've talked to. So this news is coming out. Mike Pence subpoenaed by the special counsel overseeing the Trump probes. That's Jack Smith, per ABC News. NBC has not matched or confirmed the reporting. Renato, when you look at the fact pattern that we do know Mr. Smith, as special counsel, is investigating, it involves basically a period of time leading up to and around the actual election date and through the January 6th insurrection. Many of the people who physically charged the Capitol that day, we've seen those trials ensue, and Smith's authorization focuses more on the people who were not physically present that day. That would include many individuals like one you just mentioned, John Eastman, who was at the rally and was designing plans to try to stage a coup, but was not breaking a window, so to speak. When you look at them sitting Pence down, if they are wanting to know what he knew and what he did, what do you think are the kind of questions that Smith would be asking him under oath? And related question, does it suggest that they don't view him as a party to some crime if they're trying to get his testimony right now, or not necessarily?
Yeah, I don't think that Pence is going to be a target here. I mean, here's somebody who was pressured to try to overturn the election, and to his credit, he did not do so. Now, I'm not saying he should be, praised and you should throw laurel wreaths in his direction, but nonetheless, he didn't do something that he was there was a lot of pressure on him to do that was wrongful. And so I think really what they're going to be looking for is, first of all, there were one-on-one conversations and calls between Donald Trump and Mike Pence. I would have to think that Jack Smith wants to know exactly what happened in those calls. He also is going to want to know potentially about other conversations we're not aware of between Pence and others. I mean, for all we know, for example, Ron Johnson, right, his aide was trying to get electoral votes to Pence. I wouldn't be surprised if, Jack Smith wants to ask him about any other contact that he had with senators or others regarding that theory, and whether or not there were any separate outreaches from other Trump aides or John Eastman or others regarding this plot to essentially convince Mike Pence to set aside the election, set aside the electoral votes, and throw the election back to the states and create chaos.
Yeah, and we know that Pence, of course, was both the public and private focus of one of the key plots. We've covered this here on The Beat. The January 6th committee's report goes into it in some length. There was more than one plot. There was more than one way that they were trying to engineer the overturning of the election. Most of those ways were unlawful or criminal. I make that distinction for my next question to you because it is possible that Donald Trump was just screaming unlawful orders at Mike Pence. That would certainly be bad and undemocratic, but wouldn't involve necessarily the jailing of anyone. For example, Donald Trump can yell and ask for a certain type of immigration ban. And when that was halted, people didn't go to jail. The courts halted it through the process that is dealt with for unlawful executive pursuits. On the flip, we know that in the call to Georgia and other things, it would appear that Donald Trump was directly soliciting and demanding that people commit crimes. With those two lanes in mind, what do you think Jack Smith would be more focused on? And is there, in your view, potential criminal peril here if Mike Pence tells the truth about it all? Or do you view it more like door number one, that he says, well, they had this bananas idea that I would wave my magic wand on the 6th and reverse the election, and it would have been an unlawful order, and I resisted it, and it ends there. What do you see in those two lanes?
Interesting question. I think this is certainly a pursuit of the latter lane. In other words, Jack Smith is a criminal prosecutor. He is trying to determine whether or not there are criminal charges here. I think the question is just, is he trying to build a case against John Eastman, or is he ultimately trying to build a case against Donald Trump? John Eastman has got very significant problems. We already know that he's under investigation. His phone was seized and so on by the Justice Department. And he, of course, was pushing the creation of basically false documents to be submitted to the United States Senate, right? Fake electors. So he's got some serious legal jeopardy there. And I think what Jack Smith is going to be interested in is, what was Donald Trump's role? What did he think? What did he understand? And we know Mike Pence has tried to excuse Donald Trump, at least publicly, even though his aides have been, frankly, helping build the case against Trump. Publicly, he said, look, he was just following bad legal advice. So I think Jack Smith's going to ask some very pointed questions to him. And I think a part of it's going to focus on the pressure that Trump was putting on him to go along with the scheme, because Trump was really basically trying to tell Pence, I will destroy your political career if you don't go forward with this. I'll regard you as disloyal. I will cut you off. And I think Jack Smith's going to be very interested in what Mike Pence understood Donald Trump was telling him.
It's such a big story. And Renato, one of our legal eagles, I appreciate you jumping in. Our breaking coverage continues. Our thanks to Renato Mariotti. I'm joined now by Neil Katyal, an MSNBC legal analyst, former acting Solicitor General for the Obama administration, someone who knows his way around the DOJ, including what it means when the DOJ takes the rare but sometimes legally necessary step of subpoenaing someone at this level. Neil, short question followed by a long one. When you look at a development like this legally in a special counsel case, the vice president now subpoenaed, according to ABC, where is that on a 1 to 10?
I would say it's around a 6 to 7, and with the possibility of it being higher or lower, so plus or minus 2, Ari, I'd say. So look, we've had presidents even who've been subpoenaed before. So Thomas Jefferson was subpoenaed very famously in the early 1800s. Richard Nixon was subpoenaed for the tapes and Watergate. Bill Clinton was subpoenaed for his testimony as well. So it's not unprecedented to have a law enforcement investigator take this step, but it's a big step. And the ABC News reporting is that the prosecutors have been trying to negotiate with Pence for months to testify. My guess is Pence did what he's been doing for the last 2 years, talk out of both sides of his mouth, send his aides to say some things, but not say much himself. And Jack Smith called his bluff and said, we need to get to the bottom of this. And, thank heavens for Jack Smith, because, I thought it was unforgivable that the January 6th committee, which did such a great job on so much else, but just let Pence skate and just had testimony from his aides. And so Pence is kind of like the Forrest Gump in this situation. He's kind of everywhere, but yet we've not heard from him. And so I'm glad law enforcement is hearing from him finally.
All important context you add there, and you refer to the fact that he was pursued by the January 6th committee and did not ultimately provide that testimony, although he may have found other ways to be somehow somewhat useful. And you refer to how this works, that, again, for folks who aren't as versed in it as you, that the DOJ doesn't just say, oh, we need that guy. Oh, he was vice president of the United States during the insurrection. Send him a subpoena today, and then let's bring him in. You're saying there's a much more organized long-term process, and that the exhaustion of that process leading to this development tells us what?
Yeah, it tells us that at least Jack Smith and possibly Merrick Garland believes that Pence has important information about the January 6th investigation.